And we're back out here at Jake's on the Cheap Seats. Cameron Kurtz and Jake out here, and we are joined by Lincoln High School AD Sam Knox. And Jake, you got a question that I know you've been wanting to ask Mr. Knox.
Yeah, just pertaining to conference scheduling. How does that all come about, and how do you set up the schedules?
Well, the conference ADs meet every month, and we iron out conference schedules just by meeting face-to-face through phone calls and emails. And we do have a conference master schedule rotation in every major sport that we have, from soccer to baseball and softball and basketball and football, etc. And it's pretty much spelled out for years in advance. We know who's going to play who in 2013 and 14 already.
So when they throw out the new team like they did this year, it just makes a minor tweak in it.
Yeah, football was a little bit easier, but basketball, you'll notice on the schedules this year, where traditionally we've played conference games only on Friday nights. This year, there's not enough Friday nights in the basketball season to play all the games on Fridays. So we will have a lot of conference games this year on Saturdays. And for the fans that are listening and regularly attend regular games, just know that conference games on Saturdays, the sophomore games will start at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock. It was just an idea, give people a little more time on their Saturday night. Maybe if we're playing in Springfield and the game gets over at 8:30 instead of 9:30, people have a chance maybe to go out and eat or something, to do something with their family. But conference games on Saturdays, the sophomore game will start at 5, which puts the varsity at about 6:30.
All right, that makes a little more sense to have it at an earlier time as opposed to having it 7:30, more closely to 7:45 by the time things really get started. Here's a question that I have, and I know a lot of people have this question, and depending on who you ask, you get a bunch of different answers. But when it comes to the summertime, school is out. What is the official rule as far as coaches being in contact with their players over the summer? Yeah, a lot of teams do have summer league in their respective sports. How does that all come about, and really what's the actual rule that goes with that?
Well, when it comes to summertime activities, the magic number is 25. Every coach, every team gets 25 contact days with their kids. And a contact day could be simply the football team coming in and lifting weights together. That counts as a contact day. The basketball team going to a summer league game, that counts as a contact day. Now, if you go to some of these summer basketball tournaments, you might play 5 or 6 games in a day, but it still counts as one day toward your 25. And every team has it, from girls basketball, volleyball, baseball. Well, baseball's a little bit different. They have kind of an unlimited schedule in the summer, but every high school team you sponsor, the magic number is 25. So in essence, if a kid is a 2 or even 3 sport athlete, that kid could have 75 different contact days with his football coach, with his basketball coach, and maybe with his tennis coach too.
Be a pretty busy athlete.
It'll be very busy, you're right.
Yeah, all those contact days and all those sports going on at the same time. Then we're going to get into another interesting question, and it's a kind of a broad thesis that you want to go with it, but kind of a couple of sub-questions with it. As far as hosting a contest, there are several things that have to go on behind the scenes when it comes to hosting a contest. Ultimately, you have to take a look at scheduling games due to inclement weather. And a lot of times it seems to happen more often in the spring and fall sports, which are held outdoors. What is the official rule as far as hosting a tournament that's canceled or postponed due to weather concerns?
Well, I wouldn't say there's an official rule. The IHSA simply leaves it up to the schools that are involved to reschedule whenever their field or facility is available. This fall, we had a couple challenging situations. With one night, we had volleyball going on in the gym. We had a boys' soccer game outside, and lightning came up, and a big storm was on the way. And the soccer game, the kids all came inside and hung out in the gym for a while, hoping the weather would pass. Unfortunately, it didn't, and we didn't even get to start the game because of lightning, so we just simply looked at the calendar and found a date that the team could come back and reschedule. Same thing happened with the final fresh soft football game of the year against Sacred Heart Griffin. It was on a Saturday morning. Storm came up, lightning for about an hour and a half, and we finally said, let's go home and try it again on Monday night. So yeah, most teams are pretty flexible. They understand that weather is always a factor, especially when you're outdoors, and you just reschedule, and keep in mind that it is a high school ball game. It's not the end of the world. You try to reschedule when people are available, and then you got to worry about officials as well. Sometimes when you got varsity contests that are rescheduled, you talk about ticket takers and concession stand workers and PA announcers and scoreboard operators and all those people. It takes a lot of organization and phone calls sometimes to get everything rescheduled where everybody can be there at the same time.
Another question that I want to ask, when it comes to wintertime, and especially basketball seems like it's a sport that this really affects a lot, when school is canceled due to snow or ice, how does that go into as far as rescheduling a game or calling a game off? How does that work?
Well, some schools, Cameron, have a blanket policy where if we don't have school, we don't play ball. Some schools even go as far as to if we don't have school, we don't practice, we don't play ball, we don't do any activities because the roads are too bad to come to school, then we don't do anything extra. At Lincoln High School, we don't have anything like that. We try to use the common sense principles where if the roads are really bad in the morning and we can't have school, but by 11 o'clock or noon, things are pretty cleared up and people are out traveling safely, we make a common sense decision on whether or not to play ball. And our coaches know that if they call a practice that day, let's say a kid lives way out in the country and they're snowed in, you can't really hold it against that kid for not making the practice, but the practice has kind of become optional in that case. But we've played games many times on nights where we didn't have school simply because it made sense to play. But there are other times too where, still by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's still snowing like mad, and we say, you know what, again, it's a high school ball game, we don't want to play tonight, we'll look at the calendar and reschedule.
Okay, so then that kind of really, in essence, answers the question a lot of people, and this was another one that depending on who you ask, some people say, well, if, let's say it snows on Friday, school's canceled on Friday, that you could or couldn't have a game that Friday night. So really, for us, does that really play a part in it? I guess it wouldn't, would it?
No. Again, we use common sense. Some schools we play against, I think Taylorville has a principle or a rule like that, and Rochester does as well. So if we're playing those schools, even if we're hosting or we're traveling and they don't have school, then they can't play, then our hands are tied and we simply don't play, we reschedule. But I know the Springfield schools, we've worked with them before, and they are like us, where they don't have a blanket policy that says, no school, no ball game. So maybe Springfield's out of school for snow, and so are we, but by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the roads are good, let's play ball, and a lot of times we think, too, that people have been snowed in for a day or two. They want something to do. A high school game is something they can go to, and it makes sense to play. And, I've been in the house for 48 hours because it's been snowing like crazy. Let's go out and watch a high school game. So, but we never want to put people in harm's way of traveling on unsafe roads, especially our students on school buses. So we keep a lot of that in consideration and make a common sense decision.
Real quick, the IHSA defines different classes, the A, 2A, and all that. How's that all broke down?
Well, there are numbers that they go by and percentages that they go by depending on how many schools play a given sport. We all know that a lot of schools in the state have basketball teams and football teams, but not everybody has a wrestling team or a tennis team or a swim team. So different sports are broken up at different levels. And in fact, different sports have different numbers of classes. Wrestling, for example, is at 3 classes, where basketball, baseball, volleyball is at 4 classes. And, of course, football is at 8 classes. So I don't know the breakdown of the numbers, but, as the years go by, sad to say, we're getting closer and closer every day to being a 2A school, quite honestly.
Well, quick question for you, it kind of involves co-oping it, actually. We have a small school just south of town in Mount Pulaski that does not have a football program. They have some very good athletes that actually play youth football here for Lincoln. And, there's, in a lot of cases, there's no way the parents are going to be able to move, with jobs and whatnot. What's the chances of Lincoln ever maybe assuming a co-op program with a Mount Pulaski or maybe an Emden or something like that to get some football involved in those communities?
That's a good question, Jake, and we've thought about that, as our enrollment number goes down and the number of kids going out for football goes down, and we've got 70 kids out for football, and we're playing Rochester and SHG, who have 115 kids out for football.
And like I said, with the youth football, I was watching a little bit of it. There's a lot of kids from Mount Pulaski and Emden that will come to Lincoln for youth football. Mm-hmm. So I actually was talking to a couple coaches about it a few months ago, and that was something that we were kind of talking about because it kind of makes sense with them basically they're in Logan County, they're right here. And I didn't know if there was even a rule about something like that, or that it could even possibly happen. I mean,
it could. The IHSA really leaves it up to each local school to make those decisions. But in the Central State 8 Conference, there's a bylaw in place that says at this time we are not allowing any schools to co-op in anything. And I think that principals and ADs are concerned about opening up that can of worms, so to speak. Right. Well, we'll let Lincoln co-op for football because they're a little bit down right now. They need some help with numbers, etc. what if, outside of Springfield area schools want to start co-oping with the Springfield schools for football, for tennis, for golf, for swimming, for anything, and it could become pretty wild and crazy in a quick amount of time. No doubt we could probably benefit from a co-op, but people have to keep in mind too from a co-op is that when you co-op with anybody, let's say Mount Pulaski had 300 kids. I don't know how many kids they have, but let's say they have 300. We would accept all those 300 as a part of our football enrollment, even if Mount Pulaski only sent us 4 kids to play football.
Yep.
So we would suddenly become 300 students larger and maybe only benefit from getting 4 kids to play. So there's a fine line there too.
Yep.
When you co-op something, I think you want to make sure it's going to benefit your host school and that you're really going to get a strong amount of numbers of kids, whether it's a football co-op, whether it's a baseball co-op or a track co-op or whatever. You want to do it for the right reasons,
sure,
and not just to benefit 1 or 2 kids, I think.
As we're kind of wrapping this up, a question that a lot of parents are probably concerned with, and this is something that just necessarily isn't a school-wide effect, but is also becoming a statewide and even a national-wide effect, has to do with financial terms regarding the booster clubs and everything. How is it that, does each sport have a booster club and have money set aside for that particular program?
Well, the school gives each team a certain budgeted amount every year. Not as much as it used to be, of course, but each team still gets a certain amount, whether it's $300 to spend on tennis balls or $1,000 to spend on football equipment or something like that. Mm-hmm. But we rely more and more on support from our booster clubs, and at Lincoln High School we have different booster clubs for different sports. Soccer has its own booster club. Basketball has its own booster club. Football has its own booster club. The Lady Regular Booster Club is more of a joint effort among a lot of girls' sports, but if the softball team raises $1,000 with a certain fundraiser, that $1,000 is earmarked for the softball team. It doesn't get shared with the volleyball team and the tennis team. It's earmarked for that one team to raise the money. So more and more, and it's not just at Lincoln, it's at every school, we rely a lot on boosters to help make our program successful, because if we didn't have them and didn't have all their time and effort and financial help, a lot of our teams simply wouldn't be able to exist anymore.
A lot of schools that I know, your larger schools in the Bloomington area, the Springfield area, and I'm sure several schools in the Chicago area have what they call an activity fee, where the parent guardian of a student athlete is required, let's say it's $100 to pay per sport, simply because the school is in financial concerns and can't necessarily fund a proper program like that with the funds that they have allocated to them.
Right, and we've done a little research on that. And more schools are going to that activity fee, they call it. Some schools charge every kid in the school. Some kids only charge the kids who are in activities and athletics. And we simply have not gone down that road yet, because we don't feel that we want to put that extra pressure on a kid to come up with $50 to play a certain sport. Mm-hmm. That is our very last option at this point. I'm not saying it'll never happen, because it may someday if things continue to get worse. But at this point, we are not going to go down that road, because we feel like if a kid wants to go out for a sport, he or she should be able to go out for that sport for free up front. But naturally, you got to buy your own shoes, and you got to buy your own equipment and your own uniforms, etc. But activity fees at this point at Lincoln are not under consideration.
Real quickly, though, before we go here, remind everyone about the Lincoln Thanksgiving Tournament that is coming up. We got here, it'll start Monday, November 22nd. Lincoln will play the third game of the evening against Belleville-Altoff. That game is scheduled for 7:30. Of course, we'll have that game and all of the games from the Thanksgiving Tournament right here on WLCN. Next week, we will be out at the Christian Village. We will have Lincoln head coach Neil Alexander will be joining us next week, and we will break down the Whaler season. And we'll also break down a little bit of what the Whalers are to expect next week. Or I guess, well, you could probably call it next week, about 10 days from now, for this Thanksgiving tournament. And then also that Saturday of the Thanksgiving tournament, we will be out at Roy S. Anderson, and we will have Coach Al in the house with us, and we will be presenting our show live from the tournament that Saturday. Of course, that show is sponsored by Rick Ham. For Josh Komnick, who will be back with us next week, for Jake the Furniture Guy, for Sam Knox, this is Cameron Kurtz, thanking you for joining us. We will be next week, and until then, we'll see you down the road. Thanks.